Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Pulp Crazy. I'm Jason Aiken. In this week's episode, I will be discussing a new pulp novel, Sunco, Heir of Atlantis, Volume 1, by Dr. Arthur Sippo. Art will be joining me on the episode later to discuss the book in greater depth. But first, I will provide an overview and review of the book. Sunco is often referred to as the German Doc Savage. He and his companions originally appeared in German pulp magazines from 1933 to 1938. Paul Mueller, writing under the pen name Locke Myler, wrote 150 Sunco stories during this time period, writing an average of one story every 2 weeks. The series came to an end in 1938 when the Nazi Party shut down the pulp magazines by government order. Art mentions all of this history in his introduction to the collection. If you'd like to read more about the German pulps, I'll also include links to 2 articles written by pulp historian Jess Nevins and a link to Art's Speculations in Bronze blog in the show notes. They delve into the history of the actual German pulps even more. The cancellation of his magazine in 1938 would not be the last of new Sunco adventures, though, because Art Sippo has revived and reworked the character for a modern-day audience. He's brought back Sunco, his aides from the German pulps, and even created a new aide on his own. Sunco, Heir of Atlantis, Volume 1, was published in 2010 by Age of Adventure. The book is made up of 5 short stories, 3 of which were previously published in Professor Stone magazine. There is also a great introduction by Art that highlights the history of the Sunco character, as well as the differences between Sunco and Doc Savage. Sunco, Heir of Atlantis Volume 1 is available in both paperback and eBook. I'll put a link to different sites where you can download it or purchase it in paperback in the show notes. Art's new Sunco adventures sees the time-displaced prince from Atlantis appear during a lightning storm over London on May 31st, 1932. He is a tall, muscular, blonde-haired man with blue lapis lazuli eyes, a product of ancient Atlantean genetic engineering. He is a physical and mental paragon. Additionally, his journey through time has granted him the ability to access the Akashic record, which contains the sum total of human knowledge. Sunco was meant to be sent 11,000 years into the future, when a new ice age would begin, and Atlantis would rise up from beneath the ocean once more. However, he arrived prematurely. He only traveled 10,853 years into the future. He was 147 years too early for the next ice age. This does not deter him. He decides to use this time to better position himself to succeed in his task of leading the Atlantean people during the next ice age. He encounters members of the Thule Society who become his allies. Assembling a team of top-notch aides who are all men and women of action themselves, he begins his quest. The first 3 tales are dubbed the Origin Trilogy, while the second 2 tales have never seen publication before and are one-off tales. Art really knows how to write a great pulp adventure. As a medical doctor, soldier, and an avid reader, his prose has the benefit of his lifetime of experience. This really comes into play when he describes the human anatomy during fight scenes, when he describes weapons and technology, not to mention the literary and historical references contained within the stories themselves. Art's knowledge of history, both factual and fictional, opens the doors to a lot of possibilities for telling great pulp adventures. I would highly recommend pulp hero fans, especially Doc Savage fans, read this novel. Art's version of Sunco is a fantastic alternate take on the Paragon archetype. Sunco is not meant to be Doc Savage, but the similarities are there between the two Paragons. I would also highly recommend it to fans of Philip Jose Farmer's Wool Newton universe, as well as fans of H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos. While all of these new Sunco tales stand on their own as excellent pulp adventures, Art peppers in references to other stories and characters in a Farmerian fashion. If you listen to the Book Cave, you know Art is a huge Philip Jose Farmer fan. Through some of these references, it is very clear that Sunco is set in the same universe as H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos. This is especially true in the fourth story, when the cast encounter beings from a Lovecraft ghost-written story, The Mound. Now, I enjoyed this Sunco tale so much, it caused me to read The Mound after finishing it. If you are a fan of historical fiction, this series is also right up your alley, as the background is peppered with historical German figures throughout. Stick around and hear me chat with Art about the book in greater detail. Just a warning though, we do discuss the book in depth. There will be spoilers. Also, Art was kind enough to let loose some exclusive info on his future plans for Sunco that are not to be missed. He even reveals a secret on Sunco's origin that's never been told before. I'll be right back with Art. Hello and welcome back everyone. I'm joined currently by Dr. Art Sippo, the author of Sunco, Heir of Atlantis, Volume 1. Thanks for being on the show, Art.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Jason.
Yep, I just got done reading your book later in this previous week, and I really enjoyed it. And I'm glad that you came on to talk to me about it. And first of all, I wanted to...
It's my pleasure.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, Sunco is it was a fun book. I'd written it several years ago. I had a spinal injury, and I was down for a while. And this was one of the things that I did during my recovery period to try and keep myself sane while I was getting back up and learning to walk again. It was he's kind of a guilt pleasure, as your listeners are going to find out. He's a very kind of a quirky character.
Oh yeah, I read in your introduction too that he was originally a actual German pulp character.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the Sunco character came out several months after the Doc Savage character had previewed here in America. And it was deliberately intended that he be the equivalent of the Doc Savage Superman character, but from an Aryan viewpoint. The man who wrote the Sunco stories was a man named Paul Mueller, who wrote under the house name of Lockmeyer, and he was very much into the Aryan ideology that was quite popular at the time. And as you know, Doc Savage here in America was intended to be a Superman type character who had been well trained and was a physical and mental marvel. And the intention was to create the Aryan equivalent to that character for the German market. My understanding is that the original stories had a lot of the ideological concepts and some of the racism and the anti-Semitism that were rather typical of that kind of ideology. I myself do not speak German. I have kind of dabbled into some of the original material on Sunco using dictionaries and some translators online. And I've tried to clean up the character as far as that's concerned. When Jess Nevins, who's one of the great Pulp historians, found out that I was doing a Sunco character story, he was so taken aback that I would pick up a character that had so many negative connotations. But I was strongly drawn to this character for a couple of reasons. One was that Sunco was the most popular Doc Savage clone ever, and at least prose-wise. He had 150 adventures that were cataloged over the period from 1933 until 1938, when the Nazis forced these frivolous pulp stories out of print. And I felt that this character really deserved to be made more well known. I had gleaned a lot of information as best I could from what was available online, and I wanted to try and bring this character into our pulp universe. The other thing that I found interesting about the character is that this is a Doc Savage type character who is a little darker and has a little bit more freedom. He is not as bounded by convention as Doc was. Nevertheless, he was intended to be a heroic character, in his own realm. And I liked the idea of exploring a character who was a little bit more morally ambiguous than Doc was, and to see exactly what the Doc Savage character might have been in a slightly different milieu.
See, and not only that, but you also surrounded him with other heroes from German pulp fiction as well, and I think you created two of your own too, didn't you?
Oh yeah. Well, the original Sunco character was he was associated with crossovers of other pulp characters. For example, there was a character named Jan Mayen who had an atomic airplane who was flying around having adventures, and he crossed over with Sunco. There also was the character of Alaska Jim, who was a kind of unusual character in that he was a Wild West frontier character who crossed over from actual Wild West adventures in like the late 1900s, and then also in the early 20th century in Canada and the United States. This was kind of interesting because this had this character actually having adventures over a period of 60 or 70 years, and I tried to address that by adding my own little background story to him that would have it make sense that you'd have a character who was remaining active over an extended period of time in the Western United States. There was also a character named Sternvogel who crossed over with Alaska Jim. As far as I know, Sturmvogel never crossed over with Sunco himself, but the Sturmvogel character was a German expatriate after World War One, who was going to Canada and the United States to have Wild West adventures in the German pulps. The intention was that there was a lot of pressure on German writers to have German characters and not American or Canadian characters in the pulp magazines. And he was supposed to take the place of Alaska Jim, which I think he eventually did in the 1930s. So I got all of these characters kind of tied up together. There was another character that is partly my creation, which is Shawnee, who is an Indian woman who is an assassin. She was actually based on a character that I found in a role-playing game, who had been created for a role-playing game involving Sunco. I fleshed her out a little bit, and she's actually an original prose character that I had put together. There was a character, Ludwig Minx, who is another German pulp character, but from the previous generation. Minx was a magician and kind of like a shadow type character who had supernatural adventures, fighting ghosts and supernatural villains back in the 19-teens. And I figured that would help to round out his little troupe of aides.
Oh, okay. Yeah, for some reason I was thinking Minx was your original creation. I didn't realize he was a pre-existing pulp character as well.
Yeah. Well, I didn't have any storylines about him. I had learned about him from Jess Nevins. He has this wonderful collection of characters from foreign pulp magazines, and I ran across the Minx character. I liked the name and I liked the background story. He kind of is a little bit of the Green Llama. He's a little bit of some of the other supernatural detectives like Julius Legrand and that. And I figured we needed to have a little balance in the storyline with a character that was a little bit supernatural. So I kind of created this character and invented him, pulling in little elements from other areas. So he is, to a certain degree, he is my character for sure. But I borrowed the idea and the name from this pre-existing character.
I see. I really liked Alaska Jim and Sturmvogel, but I also liked Shrek. Karsten, the private detective and spy master.
Yeah, he's another one who comes from German pulps, I have to say he was probably one of my favorites. I've always kind of liked the character who's a little bit smarter and a little bit sharper than the people around him, and who is able to get by basically by his wits, and not necessarily by force of arms. And Shrek is a very savvy character. He knows human nature very well. Shrek actually is a German word for terror. He's the terror of the underworld. Used to be a former policeman, and now he does private detective work. Ever since in the Great War, he had functioned as a spy master in England, and he was running intelligence networks there.
Yeah, and all of these guys, and gal for Shawnee, I think they could all carry their own solo adventures quite well. I think you fleshed them out a great deal, and you even applied some Philip Jose Farmer-like speculations when you fleshed them out more, such as I believe with Minx, there's some allusions to a descendant of Genghis Khan who trained Minx.
Mm-hmm.
And
yes,
could that possibly have been Shirwan Khan the Shadow's nemesis, or is that a different character?
No, that's what I had in mind. Uh, uh, Very definitely, I intended that the Sunco character and his aides were living in the same universe with the other American pulp heroes. With Doc Savage in the Shadow and with others, because they were, of course were functioning in Europe, while Doc Savage and the others were functioning primarily here in the United States.
That's a very cool approach, because you definitely have a lot of room to work with, because, as you said, most of the pulp characters from the States were kind of just hanging around in the cities. And some of them would go down to South America, it seems like, but for the most part they kind of stayed in the Western Hemisphere. So that really kind of opens up the map for you. And I know later in a later story, they traveled to Canada, and that's where they met another character that was based on one of Sunco's previous aides from the German pulps. You dubbed him Rapier X.
Right.
And I forget what was his name, Jack Hooligan?
There was a character. I couldn't hear you there.
Oh, was his name, I believe his original name was Jack Hooligan?
Right. Well, he was in the original Sunco stories. Jack Hooligan was an American black boxer who becomes Sunco's servant. And I felt that was a little bit too on the demeaning side. It was very interesting that Paul Mueller would have a black character in the storyline, and in fact, under pressure from the Nazis in the later part of the run of Sunco, he had to kill off this character because they thought it was demeaning to have a black character in there. But I intended that the Jack Hooligan character would be a little bit more complicated and be a little stronger on his own. He actually ties into another character of mine that I had created 40 years ago.
Oh wow!
For another story series. I've been a big Doc Savage fan for a long time, and I had created a few characters of my own back when I was a teenager. And anyway, the Jack Hooligan character had morphed from a family of which is mentioned actually in the story. He had been a hero in World War I, had returned to the United States, and in France there had been a number of black American soldiers who had been highly decorated. The white American soldiers didn't want anything to do with them, and in fact there's some terrible stories about white American soldiers actually opening fire on black American troops with murderous intent. It was the bad blood was so bad that they actually took the black soldiers, segregated them away from the Americans, dressed them up in French uniforms, and they fought as their own battalion. And this battalion was one of the most decorated battalions in the entire war. In fact, the battalion in question actually received a unit citation of the Croix de Guerre, which is the equivalent of giving an entire unit the Medal of Honor in the United States. And his character was one of them. And when he returns to the United States, this character goes off and becomes a cowboy in the West, because that was the one place where a black man could receive decent wages in the United States and actually be treated on par with a white man in that time period. A lot of people don't realize that 50% of the cowboys in the West who used to work out on the ranches and take steers around and all that, 50% of them were black. And there was a movie many years ago. Mary Van Peebles made a movie where it talks a bit about this and gave you a little history on it. But anyway, that's how he actually gets caught up with the one villain, which we were talking about in the story that occurs in Canada, and that's how he comes into the sphere of influence of Sun Co. And I still have some storyline involving this character. As you mentioned, we call him Rapier X because he has a particular liking for the rapier weapon. A rapier is a pointed weapon that does not have an edged blade on it, and the way you use the rapier in battle is that you use it to make stab wounds, and it's just a direct puncture into somebody. It's a lot harder to use than an edged weapon, but in the hands of an expert, it can be very deadly. And that's the type of weapon that he would carry with him all the time. That's how he got the nickname.
Yeah, I was really impressed with his fighting skills, especially. It seemed like he could move his arm almost at like a superhuman speed.
Mm-hmm. Well, he got involved with a character who came from an ancient race that's hidden under the Southwest. There's details in the story, and that actually links up to an old Lovecraftian story. There's an ancient civilization there's a story that Lovecraft did in conjunction with Zelia Bishop. The title of the story is The Mound. It is usually credited to Zelia Bishop herself, and it's Lovecraft only gets secondary credit for it, though he actually wrote the bulk of it. It is in most of the modern complete collections of stories involving Lovecraft, and that's these beings who live underground have certain abilities, and he has developed this skill. It's he's a very formidable fighter, and he is the only one up to this point who can physically stand up to Sun Co, and Sun Co has never been able to vanquish him in combat. And that actually comes in very handy, as you know, at the end of that particular story, because not of that story, but of the later story, where it comes in handy against the enemy when Sun Co himself is in trouble, and Rapier X has to come to his aid.
Oh yes, definitely. You touched on the Lovecraft connection, and from reading these stories, it looks like you're definitely using the Cthulhu mythos as part of this universe as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep. The first one to really get the Lovecraft mythos linked in with the greater Pulp Hero universe was really Phil Farmer. He linked them up. Oh God, where are you?
Oh, right here.
Okay, you there?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I just had another call broke through, but that's okay.
Okay.
Phil Farmer in the original Doc Savage biography made a connection between Johnny Littlejohn. Let me go back again.
Okay.
Phil Farmer had linked up Johnny Littlejohn and Professor Dyer from the story At the Mountains of Madness, and this kind of drew the Cthulhu mythos into the Doc Savage saga, and from that point on, I've always thought that would be that is therefore a viable addition to pulp stories, and there's been a lot of that now. A lot of the authors have added Cthulhu mythos in there. Adam Garcia I intend that what I described as the horrors in the Southern Ocean be part of the extended story of Sunko, and there's going to be more about that in further stories that I have planned.
Oh, okay. I did not know that Farmer made that connection. I haven't really gotten into Doc Savage's apocalyptic life yet, but that's interesting that he connected Johnny with Professor Dyer in the Mountains of Madness. I like that. I'm gonna have to check that out. And yeah, I did notice that you mentioned that the things in Antarctica, and was that that was a reference to At the Mountains of Madness, I imagine, and as well as the John W. Campbell story, Who Goes There? Was that part of it as well?
Yes. There have been a couple of people made the connection there. When I first read the John Campbell story, and this is going back 30 years ago, the character of MacReady in that story really sounds like Doc Savage.
Oh,
and
yeah.
If you go back and you read the story, you can see some connections between, I think Monk is in there for sure. I think that there's a character in there that sounds an awful lot like Long Tom and possibly even Rennie. So I think that also should be added in there. My friend Jeff Deischer, who has done one of the chronologies of Doc Savage, has also included that in his collection of storylines, and I think that really should be included as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I kind of got the connection with MacReady because he's a bronze-skinned giant, and there's allusions to him being a doctor as well. But yeah, I didn't pick up on those other characters might be there as well. I'll have to go back and reread that and see. But I was just thinking that as far as you also mentioned a basilisk race in Lemuria. I was wondering what that referenced.
Well, that actually dovetails over with Lynn Carter's Thongor series, Thongor of Lemuria. Have you ever seen any of those?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, Lynn Carter had done a series about ancient Lemuria, and it talked about the continent had all kinds of strange animals and people. One of the things that it had there was an intelligent tyrannosaurid-like race. There actually are several on there, and as it turns out, I might as well let a little cat out of the bag here. The continents of Atlantis and Lemuria that existed in the ancient world, the one continent from which Sunko himself came, were actually artificial. They are not natural continents. They were not made by man, but they were placed there for a particular reason, in order to act as, shall we say, prisons for the beings that were underneath them.
Oh.
This is very similar to the old idea of the Seal of Solomon. A lot of people don't know it, but there's a lot of legends about King Solomon, that he was a very wise man, and that he had seals by which he would keep demons at bay. And one of the things that was believed about the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem is that it was built as a seal to keep the demons underground. That actually Jerusalem is built on a place where demons could arise out of hell and come onto the earth. And so when the temple was built at Jerusalem, it was intended to be a seal to keep the demons from coming to the earth. And so very similarly, Lemuria and Atlantis are seals to keep these certain enemies of life at bay. There also is a continent of Mu in the middle of the lower Pacific Ocean, but that is actually an artificial continent made by humans. That's a whole nother story.
Oh, cool. That's some exclusives there. Very cool.
Yeah.
And did I read it right that Australia is kind of the present day Lemuria?
Yeah, it's part of it. Yes.
Okay. And
yeah,
the dream
that was the place where in the Lovecraftian mythos, that's the place where the great race of Yeath had lived.
Okay, and I saw that there was a mention of the dream time. Is that in relation to Lovecraft's Dreamlands, or is that more in line with the Australian Aboriginal folklore?
Well, probably a little both, actually.
Oh, okay. Very cool. Trying to see, there's a couple other places here that you mentioned. One was new to me. There was a reference when Sunko comes down and Minx kind of senses his presence. There is speculation that he might be from a couple different places. And one of them you mentioned is Aldebaran.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something I'm not familiar with. I Googled it, and I saw that it was a planetary. It was actually like a large star, and there's some fiction that's been surrounding it. And I just wanted to know, is that a Lensman reference, or is that part of the Cthulhu mythos?
Well, actually, that is a part of the Aryan mythos.
Oh, okay.
If you go back and you read some of the Aryan mythology, they believed that some of these strange Aryan myths believed that there were Aryan beings that came down from Aldebaran.
Oh, okay.
That were going to come from space and assist the Nazis in taking over the world. This was part of their myth. That's where that actually comes from. If you look that up with the Thule Society, you'll find that was part of their thing. That's where that came from. There were some very odd things that were circulating around with the Nazi ideologues. Hitler himself was not a believer in all this supernatural stuff. He believed in his own destiny. He believed in his own future and his own power. Basically, that he had a destiny to rule the world and all of that. But he didn't really believe in God or in supernatural powers. But the people around him had other ideas. Himmler was a thoroughgoing occultist. And the people who surrounded him and most of the people who were involved in the SS at very high levels believed very strongly in supernatural beings. And this was one of their beliefs that circulated around, that there were actually star beings from Aldebaran who were going to come down and assist them in ruling the world. So that's where that actually came from.
Oh, very interesting. Yeah, I'm surprised I never really heard anything about it, because just when I searched for it on Wikipedia, I think I put Aldebaran and fiction, and all these stories came up. And I did start listening to the first Lensman book, and Aldebaran, I think 3 is mentioned in the opening chapter, because I think the main character was talking to some women in a bar there. But that was one of them. Another place that I'd never heard of before is Agartha. Agartha?
Yeah, the Agartha, right. The Agartha is allegedly an underground civilization in the Himalayas. That is another place where the Aryan masters are hiding. And there was a group called the Anerba that Himmler had funded, which was supposed to go around the world searching for archaeological evidence of places like Atlantis and the world's tree, Yggdrasil, and evidence that there really was all these German mythologies were really true, and that there really was an ancient Aryan race that had risen to superiority. There's a lot of theosophist ideas that they wanted to prove were actually historically true, and they found a lot of things actually, basically because when Heinrich Himmler sends you out to find stuff proving his pet theories true, you don't come back empty-handed.
Oh, yep. You better bring something. You better bring something back.
Exactly, exactly. But they believed in the Agartha as a lost group, a lost civilization up in Tibet. And to me, it is very strange if you actually understand who the Aryans really were. True Aryans. They are the dark-skinned people of the middle area there in India, who were they are not blonde-haired, blue-eyed people the way Himmler was thinking of them. They were very much like the mainstream Indians from the Indian subcontinent, and they were the font of civilization in that place. And it's kind of odd that they were trying to find evidence that these people living in this area, in the Himalayas in particular, were the true Aryans and the true source of where the Germanic people came from. If you ever, one of the funniest things to me, if you read Mein Kampf by Hitler. Hitler has this story in there that all of the great achievements of ancient civilizations were made by the Aryans, and the Aryans disappeared because they ended up interbreeding with all these black people. Okay, and he considers Jewish people to be black, which makes no sense ethnically. Even the pyramids, all the pyramids were built by Aryans, which I think would have surprised some of the Indians in the New World, that they were all actually Germanic Aryans. But it's very, very strange, mixed up ideas of what race actually is. And none of it makes very much sense. But they continued to try and find evidence to support these crazy notions. They listed, okay, I was saying that the Theosophists had a lot of these ideas, and they were the ones who were involved with what was called the Thule Society, and Himmler was part of that group. And they had a lot of theories about, where all the races came from, and a lot of their ideas were frankly anti-Semitic. Not with the racial understandings of people like Hitler and Himmler, but
hey, Art,
you back, Jason?
Yep.
Hey.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyway, as I was saying, there were a lot of ideas from the Theosophists who had anti-Semitic ideas for their own reasons. And anyway, this I think it was because they took on some of the theosophical ideas about Atlantis and mystical history that that's why they kind of dovetailed into some of their theories on anti-Semitism as well, and it was a very strange gamish of things. Many of the people who were involved in the Third Reich had strong occultic connections, though Hitler himself did not, and most of the people who were involved, like in the German General staff did not. These guys were just thoroughgoing secularists who were doing things for very mundane secular reasons.
And in the book too, you include a lot of these historical figures, and Sunko actually interacts with them at different times. I know he does meet Hitler, and I believe he meets in the fifth story. I think that's the kind of the big one where he kind of meets up with everybody. I think, if I remember correctly, because it all centers around him trying to prevent an attack that's orchestrated by Tesla.
Mm-hmm. That's correct. Yeah, I tried to make a lot of these the stories as historically, center them historically in the right places at the right time, and have them interact with people, and to make it as plausible as possible. I mean, this is all, there's all a lot of fantasy in it. There's some science fiction in it, hopefully it's good fun, and people will be interested in what they read, and they'll go back and look at some of the original material. The one thing, the final story, The Triumph of the Will, is centered around that great Nuremberg conference they had in 1934, where the Nazis had their big convention. And this is the one that Leni Riefenstahl, she was an actress, and she also was a movie producer. She made this magnificent documentary, which is still considered to be the greatest propaganda film ever made, which depicted the entire story. And it's, as you say, during this filming, that there is going to be a terrorist attack that is motivated by Tesla and one of his disciples to try and wipe out the Nazis at that time. And Sunko is instrumental in preventing this. And this story in particular is one that I think it gives you, to me, it was one of those stories that exploits the advantage of this character, because at one and the same time you have the hero trying to prevent a catastrophe that's going to kill thousands of innocent people because it's going to destroy Nuremberg. But by the same token, you're saying to yourself, gee, should I be rooting for Sunko, or should I be rooting for the guy who's trying to destroy the Nazi Party before all the horrible things begin? And it's that kind of ambivalence in the story that I think that's the fun of this particular character, is who should I be rooting for?
Yeah, exactly.
It's because it's a moral dilemma, because very definitely Sunko has good reason to want to prevent the success of this attack. By the same token, we, with the hindsight of history, we know, the world would have been a much better place if the attack had succeeded. You're caught there, and you're feeling very conflicted about what's happening. So, that was kind of one of the things I wanted to engender in the reader, is this conflict about, gee, what should I be thinking? Who should I be rooting for? And I've had several readers telling me that they really didn't know what they should be thinking of doing at that time, and that's exactly what I was aiming for.
Oh yeah, and you definitely succeeded there, because in the previous 4 stories, Sunko was the hero. You could root for him, especially in that 4th story, because the people they were going after were some pretty bad guys.
Mm-hmm.
And in that 4th story, you can tell there's one scene where you could definitely tell how big of a fan of Philip Jose Farmer's A Feast Unknown you are.
Yes. Well, that was, that scene kind of came out of nowhere. and that was, I deliberately did that. I have wanted to write a scene like that for many years because every now and then there are people who think that they're really, really bad, that they're tough, and they're going to do some really mean and bad things, and nobody's going to stop them. And then all of a sudden they run into somebody they didn't expect, who's much badder than they are.
Yes.
And I've wanted to write a scene like that for a while, and it's it's got a little difficulty with the folks in the iBook store wanting to. Weren't sure whether they wanted to put that as an erotic book or an adventure story. We finally convinced them that it is an adventure story.
Definitely.
I didn't think it was particularly erotic. I mean, I thought the whole thing should have scared the living bejesus out of anybody.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I know I had to, put it down for a second and be like, oh, man. Because, just the prose for it. It was actually, if you're a guy, it's almost painful what she does to these, three guys, Shawnee, these three guys who attempt to rape her. To say that she turns the tables on him is putting it mildly, but it definitely was something I looked at, and I could definitely see that it must have came out. I was thinking it must have come out of your appreciation for Farmer's A Feast Unknown, which is pretty pretty well known for blending sex and violence simultaneously. And in this scene, I think you definitely take it farther than even Farmer did in the blending.
Oh yeah.
But I think that was just a very powerful scene.
Yeah. Well, have you read the recent reprint they had of A Feast Unknown from Titan Books?
No. I have looked. I read your. Did you do the afterword? It was based on your speech from, I think, Pulp Fest 2011.
Right. Well, there's a little story that goes with that. Titan Books was doing reprints on Phil Farmer's work, and especially the Wool Newton stuff. And A Feast Unknown had come up because basically A Feast Unknown was the first venture that Phil Farmer had into the pulp world. And Win Eckert had been trying to convince them that they really should do A Feast Unknown because of its importance that way. And they weren't sure they wanted to go near it. So I had given a talk a couple of years earlier at one of the early FarmerCons, that Feast Unknown had been the first story of Phil's that I had ever read. It's a hell of a first story to read of his because of its extreme nature.
Oh yeah.
And he asked me if I would, he had asked me to do an appreciation of A Feast Unknown for the particular FarmerCon there at Pulp Fest, which I did. And he approached me afterwards and said, we've been trying to convince the Titan book people to do A Feast Unknown. They've been reticent about it. Could you take the talk you gave? Could you, clean up a little bit and tighten it up? And we want to give this as a proposal to them to explain to them why A Feast Unknown is worthy of being reprinted, where it stands in Phil Farmer's, complete body of work, and convince them to go ahead and reprint it. And so I did. It was on the strength of that speech of mine that I had turned into a little essay that Titan Books decided to go ahead and reprint it. They were so pleased with it that they asked me to include that as an afterword, actually after Ted Sturgeon's original afterword, which had been with the first edition. And not only that, but they also asked me to give it as an introduction. They wanted me to write a brief introduction as well. So I had the privilege of doing the introduction to the reprint and having the final afterword. And, and I took, in my afterword, I took some exception to what Ted Sturgeon had written in his original afterword, because I thought that, he had not quite understood what was going on. So I did that. So, it was kind of it was a very surreal moment for me, because this was the very first Phil Farmer book I'd ever read. It had made a great impact on me, and I was instrumental in convincing a publisher to republish it. And I also had been given the privilege for a new introduction and a new afterword on it.
Oh, very interesting. Yeah, I read the an old paperback of it. I have the new edition. I just haven't got a chance to check out the bonus materials yet, but I'll definitely read your foreword as well as the two afterwards as well. Yeah. That was the first Farmer book I read as well. I read it right after I read Tarzan of the Apes and Doc Savage, The Man of Bronze. I really liked it. I think there's Farmer.
Well, it was kind of. Oh. I had.
Oh, go ahead, Art.
Yeah, I was going to say, I had first read Tarzan of the Apes about 5 months earlier. That was the first time I'd read Tarzan of the Apes. My experience with Tarzan, of course, had been the Johnny Weissel on TV. And I read Tarzan of the Apes about 5 months before I read A Feast Unknown. So all of the things that Phil talked about in the original storyline, they'd be fresh in my mind. And I'd been a big Doc Savage fan at that point for about 5 to 6 years. So, it all kind of gelled together. And I appreciated that what Phil was doing. And see, this is back when I was all of about 16 at the time when I read it. And I appreciated that what Phil was trying to do here was trying to take these characters and kind of show them a little more realistically and in a little bit more of an adult fashion, and to approach themes that were not possible to deal with in the pulps. I also appreciated that, Phil was trying to look at the broad range of heroic characters, from the noble savage, man in his most natural state, as the ape man living in the jungle, to man in his most civilized state. The man of tomorrow, Doc Savage, as the most highly educated and highly trained human living in the civilized world. And it's very obvious that at the end of A Feast Unknown, Phil Farmer has a definite preference for man in his most natural state.
Oh, yep, I would agree.
Yeah,
I would also say that I think Farmer, he writes some very good Tarzan jungle action scenes too. Even in this one, in Lord of the Trees, you see it in The Dark Heart of Time, as well as Lord Tiger. He just seems to really excel at putting like a feral man in the jungle, and if he has enemies there that are approaching him, it definitely makes you feel like that he's a predator in that situation. There were times, I think even when he has a firearm, especially, it seems like these people just have no chance against him in his natural environment.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, Phil really understood the characters at a very basic level. He was a natural, and he writes with an awful lot of savvy and a lot of depth. And unfortunately, a lot of people do not get past some of the more gaudy the more salacious images, they don't really get what's behind it. Phil was very subtle sometimes, but he didn't think that there was any reason why we had to sugarcoat things. For him, he realized that things that were most important to people were things that we sometimes least talked about in fiction. Sex was very important to people. Relationships were very important to people of sexual kind. And Phil was very honest in trying to write about them and about trying to fit that stuff in to real life. His stories, like Mother, for example, and The Lovers, which were two of his groundbreaking science fiction stories, they dealt with issues that nobody else really had been dealing with in science fiction. He broke into these areas, and he was really quite ahead of his time. I also, at this point, see the book is now been announced for publication. There's going to be a new volume in the series on the worlds of Philip Poe as a farmer, and in there I've got an introduction to an essay, a story of Phil's, I should say, which is called Moth and Rust. This is the actual sequel to his story, The Lovers, which was his first major work. I believe it got him a Hugo, way back in the 1950s. And this is his the Moth and Rust was the story that comes on after The Lovers, and it deals with a lot of issues about religion and about sex, and I go into some detail there relating what's going on in the story to things that were actually occurring in Phil's own time, and how he was showing concern for some of the current state of affairs in religion, that was going on in the early 50s. I also talk a little bit about The Lovers as well. And he took the original story, Moth and Rust. He never reprinted it. It was only reprinted in Starling Stories back in 1953. I think that's right. And then he rewrote it and expanded it and created a book called The Day of Time Stop, where he changed some of the elements of the story. And I talk about this in the essay. And I think it loses some of its power by doing that. But I think the reason he does it is because it's a much more mature Phil Farmer who was writing this. He rewrote it and republished it probably, it was like 1979, 1980. And I go into some detail in the essay as to why I think he did it. But it's interesting. Anybody who's interested in Phil's story, The Lovers, and what was really going on there and how this all dovetailed with his concerns, they might be interested in reading my essay there in this new edition. So that's going to be coming out in time for FarmerCon and Pulp Fest in the end of August.
Oh, it sounds great. Looking forward to that. Those are always a lot of fun. I got the first three here, and there's so much in there. They're definitely good reads.
They're going to be reprinting. They're going to be reprinting Moth and Rust in this anthology. So I'm going to have the introduction to Moth and Rust. This is the first time it's been reprinted in, it's 60 years. So it's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, I just bought at the last Pulp Fest. I bought the 2 startling story issues for that have The Lovers and Moth and Rust. I haven't gotten around to reading them yet, but I heard that seeing them in their actual Pulp magazine original format, that both of them are different than the later versions. So I was really interested in checking those out.
Yeah, and actually, to be honest, there is a third story, which is actually the prequel to The Lovers, that's called Rastignac the Devil, which you can actually get from Amazon as an electronic format book that is probably you ought to read before you read The Lovers, because it helps to explain a little bit about the world of the lovers first.
Oh, okay.
So, and I think it's relatively cheap too. In fact, I think at the time that I downloaded, I think it was actually free.
Yeah.
It was public domain.
Yeah, I believe it is as well. That's one of the ones that kind of fell through the cracks and are now public domain.
But he sets up the story in Wrestling After the Devil, then The Lovers comes next, and then Moth and Rust. And The Day of Time Stop is actually quite different. So you really need to read the original 3 stories, and then you should then read The Day of Time Stop after that, and you'll see the differences. And I think the essay that I have in the book will explain, what the differences are, and I think you'll find it more interesting.
Cool. Yep, and you can pre-order that book at meteorhousepress.com. I'll put a link to it in the show notes as well. But let me see. Getting back to Sunco, I had I had a question about a character that pops up in the first storyline, and then he kind of leaves, and we don't see him again. Father Ator, the warrior monk.
Mm-hmm.
Is he one of your own creations, Art?
Yeah, he's one of mine. Father Aitor is going to show up. I have plans for him. I intended to bring him in to some of the other stories, but for reasons of length, I didn't get the chance to do that. But he will be back.
Great.
He's actually a warrior monk of the in the Jesuits mold. This is a secret branch of the Jesuits. They have a little monastery up in the mountains there in the Pyrenees, and they go out doing little missions every now and then, trying to keep the peace. And Aitor is actually, that name actually is a Basque name. It's the equivalent of Abraham in Basque, and it's always been a mystery as to who the Basque people are and where they came from. And one of the myths has been that the Basque people are a remnant of the original Atlantean civilization. And in the story, that's who Aitor is. His ancestors were some of the original Atlantean people, and in their little monastery there in the Pyrenees, they have they're one of the groups that has been able to hide themselves from the Akashic record. The Akashic record is that the record that of all human knowledge that is permeates the world, and that adepts supposedly can dip into and get information from, and Sunco has the ability to do that. But even he is not able to find any information on them, only little bits and pieces here and there from other people. And he's going to be back.
Oh, good. Excellent. And another part of the story, you mentioned these caches, and one of them, I believe, it sounds an awful lot like Opar.
Well, I have to, I gotta remember about that one now. Probably, I don't think I had Opar so much in mind, but I did have one of the caches that I had in mind was the one up in the Pyrenees. And in my mind, that cache in the Pyrenees was the source for the technology from the story He Could Stop the World, one of the Doc Savage stories, where they had all these technological advances, and they had built a city around Mount Shasta, and they were going to try and take over the United States. I'm trying to remember what because it was He Could Stop the World was the original name of it. I'm trying to remember I think that was the name they gave it in the Bantam series. I'm blanking on what the original name was, but that's one of them there.
Okay, that's the one that says in 1929 it was unearthed, and it's now it was currently wreaking havoc across in the U.S.
Yes.
Okay. And the reason I thought of Opar for the other one was because you mentioned an errant British lord uncovered it. I wasn't sure if that was Opar, or if that was possibly another site.
Gee whiz, you really read close on that. An errant British lord uncovered it. I'm gonna have to remember. You know, which again, I'm gonna have to think about that one.
Okay.
that you know,
because it sounded like Opar.
That's what I remember.
Okay.
Yeah. That could actually have been so. Because Opar, I envision Opar as being from the period immediately after the fall. See, Africa had never been conquered by the Atlanteans. It couldn't have been, because the Africa had been the Africans had resisted the Atlanteans. I think I mentioned that in the storyline, that they had fought them off, and eventually what they did was they made a truce. You know what? I'm gonna back up. It's all coming back to me now. It's terrible when you get old, Jason. These things have to come back. Yeah, you're right. That is what it's supposed to be. It is Opar.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, that's right. Now it is flashing back. It is Opar, because what happened is the Africans were never conquered by the Atlanteans. They could never do that, because the Africans had a lot of this native native abilities that were eventually used. They used the genetics of that to help make Sun Co. That's another thing that's going to come out. Sun Co's genetics. Sun Co is a genetically engineered human. He was made to be the perfect human. That's what was intended, and at least 30% of his genes come from Africa, because that's where the greatest human diversity is. And it was the Africans who, by dint of their genetics, were able to keep the highly technological peoples of Mu and Lemuria and Atlantis from conquering them. So they allowed the Oparians to come in and mine for gold and other things which they had no use. I see. In the Philip Jose Farmer universe, of course, they had you had the Kokarsa kingdom, and I see the kingdom in Kokarsa as being something after Atlantis sunk.
Very cool.
That whole area there, that period that is talked about is it is not related to it, because the Africans they're not being bothered by the Atlanteans, and so that whole area there is separate. But when Atlantis is around, they license certain places to be used by the Atlanteans and by the Movians in order that they can get these minerals which the Africans have no use for.
Oh, that's very interesting. Even got a little exclusive in the Sun Co's background there, as far as his genetics go.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool.
Oh yeah. See, that's one of the reasons. I should say something about, because Sun Co does get involved with the Nazis, and one of the reasons he gets involved with the Nazis is because the Nazis are eugenicists. And Sun Co was created to be a genetically perfect human. And naturally, he's going to fall in with people who understand this sort of thing. That's why he kind of falls in with the Nazis up front. But I believe that Sun Co is a naturally heroic person. Not only that, he actually was made to be heroic. His father was trying to create a great ruler and a king, and so Sun Tzu was really designed to be that. And as such, he was designed to be a man of honor and a man of power, and somebody who was born to rule. And Sun Tzu's view of the master race is a little bit different than Hitler's. Hitler sees the master race as going and crushing all the other slave races under his boot, and Sun Tzu doesn't see it that way. The master race is there to be the master and to, utilize all of the subordinate races to the benefit of the overall kingdom. He's there to rule them, not to destroy them. And, I firmly believe that because Sun Tzu has all these abilities, all of this knowledge, and he's blessed because of the vicissitudes of him falling out of paratime and crash landing in 1932, he has gained this access to the Akashic record. He has access to virtually all of human knowledge. He has so much information, so much capability that I'm a very firm believer that someone who has all that information and all that capability, they're not going to be playing in the Nazi sandbox for very long. It becomes obvious. I hope that I have that in the stories.
Oh,
that
yeah,
Sippo is becoming
definitely.
He's becoming disenchanted with what's going on because the Nazis are so crazy, and they are not they're not taking responsibility for what's going on. Hitler is not as great a leader as he thinks he is. He doesn't take responsibility for matters, and it is my belief that eventually Sun Tzu is going to become disenchanted enough that he's going to leave. In fact, it's interesting to note that as I said, the Sun Tzu stories disappeared by 1938. He is not there at all during the war. And during all the horrible things that the Nazis ended up doing, the really bad things that everybody dislikes the Nazis for. They were thugs and murderers from the beginning. There never was a springtime for Hitler, if you know what I mean.
Right. Yeah, just in your narrative.
There never was a time where you could point to him and say, well, this point, yeah, right.
Yeah.
But eventually, Sun Tzu's got to leave, and in my mind, what's going to happen, and I'm trying to work my way up to that point in the story, during the 1938 crisis of Czechoslovakia, the army is aware that Hitler wants to invade Russia. They know he wants to invade there because he wants Lebensraum. He wants to get a frontier so that the Aryans can expand out into the east. And the German general staff, the military staff, knows that Germany has a powerful army. Yes, they've got a great army. They've got all kinds of technology, but they don't have resources. And the one thing they do not have is they do not have men. They have a very powerful standing army, a very large standing army, in violation of all of the protocols from after World War I. But they don't have enough men in order to sustain total war, to go up against the Russians. Russia has 3 times the population that Germany does. And that's Russia alone. I mean, with the rest of Europe, there's still, the rest of Europe has at least 2 to 3 times as many available men as Germany. And then you have the United States, which is also almost 3 times the size. Not quite as big as Russia, but almost 3 times the size. And the German general staff also know that they don't have the natural resources. The problem is that inevitably there will not be enough troops to maintain. They probably can conquer large areas, but they don't have enough troops to occupy them, and they certainly do not have enough troops to continue total war for decades. It's not going to happen. And in fact, that's what we saw at the end of World War II. They had old men and children fighting the war against the Russians as the Russians were coming toward Berlin. It was just a total shambles. So anyway, the German general staff had decided that, when Britain and France tell Hitler no go on Czechoslovakia. There was going to be a coup, and they were going to take Hitler down. Okay, that was their plan, and they were going to depose him. And of course, Neville Chamberlain came there like an idiot and gave away the store in Munich in 1938. When that happened, Hitler's popularity soared, and that was the end of it. The coup fell apart. Hitler found out about it. He started, going after the members of the coup, and it, in my estimation, I think Sunco would have been part of the potential coup, and that was the point where he had to leave. And it's at that point that I think he leaves Nazi Germany and he goes somewhere else to pursue his own goal. And his goal actually is going to be to find the remnants of the Atlantean civilization, which he hopes is out there somewhere.
Oh, great. Yeah, and or you can definitely just tell from your narrative that Sunco definitely isn't buying into anything these guys are selling. Just from my point of view, it looked like he arrived, he was on his own. There was some Thule society connections, so he decided to, join up with them, and then it seems like he's almost, I don't know if he's using them. He just carved a nice place out for himself, and I think as soon as he even says in like one chapter he doesn't think much of Hitler as a leader, because Hitler just kind of reams into people and then leaves the room and lets other people come up with a way to fix it. So yeah, you can definitely tell that this isn't Sunco. He's not really buying into everything, but he's in a position where he is able to, I see, for instance, where he's able to make his own, he has his own estate that you give him.
Right.
And you also kind of throw in a parallel to Doc Savage as far as that hospital.
Right. Yeah, Bruni Hospital.
Yes.
It's named after one of the Valkyries.
So it seems like he's in a nice position where, well, he has that money from the prince, and since the Nazi Party isn't threatened by him, he's kind of allowed to operate in Germany, and he gets to do all this kind of cool Doc Savage stuff.
Yeah, he has a preference for working with the Kripo, the criminal police, as opposed to the Gestapo, which is the state police. But that's going to go by the wayside pretty soon, because after after the Nazis had taken over, within 2 years, by 1935, Himmler has taken over everything. Himmler will be head of the criminal police and the German state police. In fact, they're going to be merged very soon. And this is something that a lot of people don't know. You're familiar with Interpol?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Interpol, the name actually comes from the telegraph, the telegraph station that they had in the 1950s in Geneva. Okay, that's where you get the name Interpol. That actually was the International Police Commission. It originally was in Austria. After the Anschluss in 1938, Himmler takes that over. He takes it, brings it to Berlin. He becomes the head of Interpol.
Wow.
And all this international police coordination goes through him. He's the boss.
Oh, wow.
He actually interfaces with J. Edgar Hoover.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Well, see, a lot of people don't know this. You got to read the history. It's after the war that Interpol is reorganized, and it gets reorganized with its headquarters in Geneva, in Switzerland. And it's not called Interpol before that. It's called the International Police Commission. And, just as an aside, remember Mr. Moto?
I've heard of him. I've never read or seen any of the movies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, Mr. Moto was originally a character created by John Marquand, who was a Pulitzer Prize winner, and he was kind of an unusual character, a background character in stories where you had a Westerner who goes to the Far East, and Mr. Moto kind of assists him in doing things. Well, anyway, the Mr. Moto character becomes a movie character in the 1930s, played by Peter Lorre, and in the movies he is a member of the International Police Commission. So he was Mr. Moto was a member of the International Police Commission working out of San Francisco.
Oh, okay.
Primarily. So and all that stuff changes. And all that stuff, of course, changed during the war. They did all kinds of strange things during the war. Kato of the Green Hornet was Japanese in the 1930s. He was Filipino during the war, in fact, being Japanese after the war.
Yeah, right.
and then his most famous, act playing him was a Chinese American.
Yeah, Bruce Lee.
Bruce Lee.
Yep.
But anyway, this is I have some ideas in mind for a Pat Savage story that's dealing with this rather interesting little interlude where Heinrich Himmler is the head of the International Police Commission, allegedly coordinating police activities all over the world.
Oh, yeah, that would be really cool.
Yeah, because he did that, for several years. He was until America gets into the war, he is actually functioning as in the IPC job, still doing this, and still running agents in the United States.
Wow. Oh, yeah, I'd definitely say there's a nice pulpy story there.
Mm-hmm.
But you were also talking about the hospital that he runs.
Right. Getruni. Yeah, the Getruni Hospital. Getruni was she was one of the Valkyrie. And I have to go back and look her up. But she was one of them who had given in the story of the Rings of the Nibelung, the great hero in the Rings of the Nibelung is Siegfried, and Getruni gives him a potion to make him forget who he was, because she's in love with him, and she wants him to fall in love with her instead of him being in love with the woman he really loved, which was another one of the Brunhilde.
Yeah, that's right, Brunhilde.
This is love among the Valkyrie. So she's struck. Yeah. So anyways, she gives him a potion to make him forget his love for Brunhilde. So she's the perfect person to name the hospital after, for where Sunko goes and operates on people and brainwashes them and makes the criminals into his willing dupes. And of course, that's the place where they send Rapier X. After he's captured, he's down there, and they're trying to work with him, and that's one of the places where I think the homey advice and intelligence of Shrek Karsten comes in handy, and he actually solves the problem for Sunko as to how to deal with this very interesting character. I should make mention about Rapier X that his character is originally Paul Mueller had created him. He was a prince of his black tribe in Africa, and his name was Nimba. Okay, it was his African name. And we didn't delve into that yet. That's going to actually come up. I have a story in mind for him where this is going to happen during the Ethiopian War that was fought between Italy and Ethiopia back in 1936 to 1938, where he's going to get involved. He eventually, I think I think I have that in the story. At the very end of the story, he goes back to Paris after the adventures he has with Sun Co, and with some money that Sun Co fronts him, he opens up a little club there, which is called the Coro Tenebra, the Heart of Darkness. Because Paris is the one place in the world where he was treated as an equal, and he's going to be waiting there for the coming of World War II, and we're going to see how he's going to fare.
Oh, really? I'd definitely be interested in reading about that. That would be really cool. Yeah, I think it just gives show you that as much knowledge as you have about history, I think that's really a benefit for your writing, because you find ways to fit these fictional characters into these historical settings, like that Ethiopian war. That sounds awesome. I'm trying to think what other type of elements you added. Oh, similar to how Doc Savage has a mine of gold with an Aztec source for Sun Co. He has a surplus of gold, but the source is actually dwarves.
Yeah, I thought that was rather appropriate for an Aryan hero. Just kind of made sense. Now, it's interesting. In the original Sun Co story, Sun Co actually gets a Mayan source of gold.
Oh, Mayan. Yep, not Aztec.
Right. Yeah, well, Mayan, Aztec. Well, now, of course, the Avenger, Richard Henry Benson, he goes and he gets an Aztec source of gold.
That's probably where I got confused, yeah.
Yeah, which I thought was, I said, no, man, couldn't they come up with something a little bit more original for the Avenger? Because I thought Doc's made tremendous sense. When they did it for the Avenger, I said, oh, man, they're just copying. But I wanted to have something a little bit different, so I figured, well, dwarves just make sense.
Yep, and these are actually Neanderthals, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I wanted to make them basically non-humans. Okay, they're human, yeah, but they're not really Homo sapiens. I wanted them to be different, and I tried to make them a little bit different. At that time, based on some of the work that had been done with Neanderthals, the speculation about how they were socially organized. So these guys are, they're dwarves. They're a nasty piece of work in some ways, but they're interesting. I hope that I was able to make their little non-human civilization make sense.
Yeah, definitely. They felt, you could tell, yeah, they did have humanity, but they didn't have the same type of beliefs. And what I really liked was the fight scene where Sun Co has to go up against their champion on the back of a giant war bear. That fight scene was pretty unique, and it didn't go quite like I expected it.
Yeah, well, it took me a while to figure that out. It took me a whole week to figure out how that fight scene was going to have to work, because it was tricky. you got Sun Ko down there, and you got a war bear, and you got their champion, who is, even though he's not very tall, he's pretty stout, and Sun Ko's got to find some way of unseating him from this bear without getting himself clawed to death. And it took me a little while to get that all figured out. Meanwhile, Sun Ko, of course, did it all in just a couple of minutes.
Right. Yep. He almost made it look easy.
Yeah. Well, he's an Aryan Superman. What do you expect?
Yep. Another a creature that is present in the woods outside of the cache is a Tetzelworm.
Mm-hmm.
Are they from any particular story?
Well, the Tetzelworm is an actual cryptid that people have reported in the Alps. In fact, Phil Farmer makes mention of the Tetzelworm in, I believe it's, The Deadly Dwarf. He makes mention of it, and I had seen it in an old cryptid book that I'd gotten in the 1970s. This is it's speculated that it may be a giant salamander, because there are some large, unusual salamanders that do live up in the Alps that have been seen. Not quite as big as this, but this also has some connotations with H.P. Lovecraft and the Serpent People.
Oh, okay.
I depict these Tetzelworms that were living there as being rather clever, but not really intelligent. Probably more like chimps in intelligence than like humans.
And he later imports them into the woods surrounding his estate back in Germany, correct?
That's right. Yeah, well, they're pretty formidable, in their own way, because they're a lot smarter than any of the other animals he has there in the estate, and they also use weapons, which also helps.
Mm-hmm.
And the Tetzelworm is a cryptid that comes from, not really from the Alps, well, no, actually from the Alps. So his estate is down there in Bavaria, so that would be the place where you would actually find some of these things.
Cool. There's one other historical figure, Count Francis Riccozzi, a.k.a. Count Saint Germain.
Right.
Is I had to Wikipedia him because I really didn't know a whole lot about him, but he shows up in the, I forget which part, and he's in the Origin trilogy, and he shows up again.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a pretty formidable opponent. What made you decide to include him in the story?
Well, I needed to get someone who would be a formidable opponent for Sun Ko. In the original Sun Ko stories, his recurring nemesis is a fellow by the name of Juan Garcia. And in fact, Juan Garcia is going to show up in the Sun Ko novel I'm currently working on. And which I've been working on for a couple of years now. I got to get it out of me as soon as I get a chance. Oh God, I just need some time to write some of this stuff. But I wanted somebody who was going to be tough enough to actually take Sun Ko on, and I decided to get Count Saint Germain because he would have been he was definitely involved in some of the occultic groups. He would have been involved with the Thule Society, and he was somebody who was involved in the democratic revolutions in the 19th century. And he would be someone very much opposed to what Hitler was doing. And Sun Ko was aligned with Hitler at that point. So I figured that he would be a perfect foil. Also, he would have enough clout that he would be able to give Sun Ko a good run for his money. And that's how he gets involved. And personally, I see him as more of a dangerous foil to my version of Sun Ko than the Juan Garcia character is going to be. But he's an interesting character because the way the reader is going to see him, he's not necessarily a villain. He is an antagonist because he's going to be opposing Sun Ko because of his connection to Nazism, which kind of makes him a, quote, good guy, close quotes, even though he is Sun Ko's foil. And in the one story, it is Rakosi who is behind the plot that's going to destroy Nuremberg. So, yeah, he's a good guy, but also he's one who's willing to sacrifice the people in that city for the sake of getting rid of the Nazis. So this is another one of those morally ambiguous things. He's willing to have a certain amount of collateral damage for the sake of fulfilling his end. So we're going to see a little more of him. At the moment, Ludwig Minx is trying to hunt him down. Minx is, in many ways, the most powerful of Sun Ko's aides when it comes to this kind of adept like Rakosi.
Interesting. I also noticed in that one scene, Minx is a pretty good hand-to-hand fighter himself.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, well he had to be. He was going to have to hold his own against in that one scene. Sun Ko has got his hands full, and Minx has got to take care of things. But of course, Minx is not going to be the same kind of hand-to-hand combat expert that Sturmvogel or Alaska Jim will be. But he's going to do all right. After all, he is a magician. Part of his cover is as a stage magician. And if you ever known any stage magicians, you have to be in very top physical condition in order to do that stuff. So he's got to have good mind and body control. And that's going to do him well in a battle.
And speaking of adepts, there was one guy that appears, I believe it's in the third part of the origin story. He's the Agartha representative in Germany. His name spelled X-A-U-X, or I'm not sure how you'd pronounce that. Zhao's?
Probably Zhao.
Zhao, okay. Right. Is he from any particular story?
He is actually intended to be a crossover from Phil Farmer's A Feast Unknown. He's even though he is from Agartha, that's actually Zazaz.
Oh, cool.
Who is the head of the Nine at that point in time.
Oh, very cool.
So, nobody knows that at that point, but that's going to come out sometime later. That particular character is, remember I mentioned about the story about the Ethiopian War. It's down in that part of Africa is where the Nine have made their headquarters, and that's going to figure. The Nine are going to figure prominently in that story. Now, of course, I don't have permission to use the characters of the Nine from Farmer's Estate, so we're going to be careful about that. But there's, for those who are looking carefully, they're going to realize that there's a connection there.
Interesting. Yeah, I thought that name looked somewhat familiar. And yep, that there's also a an allusion you make to a certain pulp hero, another bronze pulp hero, and not Sunko, who Sunko comes into contact with while accessing the Akashic record. Do you anticipate any more direct meeting between the two than that, or will they just be two ships passing in the night, so to speak?
Oh, I think there's going to be some cross-pollination between them. I doubt I will ever get permission to actually allow those two characters to officially meet, but I have an intention of them actually working together on a major project that's going to come to fruition in this century. So, we'll
cool,
see.
Nice. And I guess
yeah. Now I have to ask you: did you pick up on the character Piron Quick?
I did.
Do you know who he's supposed to be?
Yeah, I believe Long Tom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but who else?
Tom Swift Sr.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Well, actually, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I have. It's one of the things that always struck me when I read my first Doc Savage novel, which was The Land of Terror. When I read the description of Long Tom, it immediately struck me that he sounded an awful lot like Tom Swift. And from the beginning, this is going back to 1965, I had a sneaking suspicion that Long Tom and Tom Swift were actually the same person. And that's the connection I make there. In fact, I deliberately created this storyline so that anybody who is familiar with the timeline of the Doc Savage stories would see that Piron Quick's absence and the fact that Long Tom is in Europe working with one of his teachers, that they would correlate. Nice. And that's one way in which Doc Savage and Sunko, I think, are going to have their first meeting, because there's going to be a reckoning about what Long Tom almost did to Nuremberg.
Oh, yeah, very cool. I also, even though Tesla wasn't one of the main characters, he was kind of, off screen. But I thought that was really cool that you put him in there. I just kind of started learning about him, and it seems like he's a real unsung pioneer.
Oh, yeah. Well, everybody knows about Marconi and radio. What they don't know is that Marconi actually stole the idea from Tesla, and that Tesla won the court case, and he is officially the inventor of radio. He also is the inventor of alternating current and a few other things. And the weapon that I described in the Triumph of the Will was a weapon that Tesla allegedly said he had developed.
Oh yeah, because he in the story, it almost seems like he kind of let the cat out of the bag in that little press release that he did.
Right. And in the story, what he was doing was he was going to use Nuremberg as evidence of this, so that people would buy it, so that nations would buy his weapon. But anyway.
Well, have you ever heard that I forget which Lovecraftian deity it was. Somebody was thinking maybe Tesla was the inspiration for him. Have you ever heard that? It might have been Nyarlathotep, maybe.
Nyarlathotep. I had not heard that, but it wouldn't surprise me. Lovecraft did kind of playful things like that. It wouldn't surprise me that he did something along those lines. He and Robert Bloch traded that between themselves. Oh gosh! In fact, Phil Farmer included those two characters that they had created. Each one of them had created a character based on the other and put them in a story where they died horribly.
Well, I guess kind of my last questions for you, Art, would be the future of Sunco, and you've already hinted at some other things, but do you anticipate publishing another novel or short stories?
Yeah, I'm working on a novel now. I'm about 3/4 of the way through it. It's a little ambitious, and hopefully I'm hoping to get it done this summer. God help it. I want to get that out. I find the novel is a very long and difficult way of doing things. I probably am going to try and stay to the novella length for my stories in the future. So I have several of them in mind. I mentioned one about the Ethiopian War. I have a story I want to do about linking, Sunco to the coup that eventually topples Hitler. There are a couple of other nascent ideas that I have that I want to get out. I also want to try and get a story which kind of links Sunco to other pulp heroes in his day, not necessarily in an antagonistic way, but links them positively. That's something for the future. Right now, if I can just get this darn novel finished. The novel is relatively ambitious. It's got a really big MacGuffin. It's going to introduce some of the other classic characters that were part of the Sunco story in the original German, who have not been introduced. For example, we're going to be introduced to the original love interest in the Sunco story. Yeah, I was going to say. In the new novel, we're going to be going back, introducing some of the original story characters. Hal Mervyn, who was the bellhop in the original story, is the bellhop in the hotel where Sunco originally landed. He's going to be a bellhop, but from a different place. Then the original love interest for Sunco was I'm going to have her as an Italian princess, Joan Martini, and this is going to create a little bit of a love triangle issue for Sunco, because he has Shani, whom he is very, very closely attached to, but now Joan Martini comes, and she is an actual princess of the blood, which Shani is not, and she's going to have her own attraction for him. There's also going to be his actual nemesis, Juan Garcia, and Juan's brother Manuel, who has a different place in the Sunco world. And we're going to introduce an adventure in the New World, another one, but this one is more along the lines of one of Sunco's earlier adventures, where he does go to South America and discover some very interesting secret things hiding away back there in the Amazon. That's as I said, I'm almost done with it. I've just got to sit down and write the darn thing. It's got to get some time, and then who knows? One of the other things that I'm interested in pursuing is Sunco's the original mission for the ship that Sunco was flying when he decided to come to the future was to go to Mars to discover what's going on with this civilization that was starting to develop on Mars. And it's going to turn out that he's going to try and go back there, and it's probably going to happen after he leaves the Nazis behind, because he's going to be concerned about what looks like the rise once again of this same civilization, and he's going to consider it a threat to Earth. And that's going to be his next big mission, is to go to Mars and to bring his merry little band of aides with him.
Oh,
so
wow.
That's a little bit ambitious, but we'll see.
Oh, that sounds awesome. Something definitely to look forward to. But, yep.
I hope so.
Oh, yeah. And Volume 1, for anyone that wants to get it, it's available on Lulu.com.
Right.
I see the paperback, and I just noticed that there's an eBook edition of it now, too.
Yep, it's an eBook format. It's an eBook over at Barnes & Noble's as well. And it's on iBooks for the iPhone.
Oh, excellent. I'll be sure to put all of those links in the show notes. Definitely go and check this out if you're a fan of pulp characters, adventure, historical fiction. If you're a fan of Philip Jose Farmer and the Wool Newton universe, this will be right up your alley. There's a lot of cool references in it, different literary and historical characters. I think I really enjoyed it, and I'm really looking forward to more art. And
thank you.
Thanks for coming on and talking to me about it.
Oh, it was my pleasure, Jason. Thank you for having me.
Great. Well, this is Jason Aiken with Art Sippo, and thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Take care now.
See ya. Thanks for watching, everyone. Pulp Crazy is located at pulpcrazy.com. I'm at Pulp Crazy on Twitter and facebook.com/pulpcrazy. My YouTube channel is located at youtube.com/pulpcast. For this particular episode, I'll be using Sunco covers that play in the background while the episode is played. You can also email me at pulpcrazy@gmail.com. Be sure to check the show notes for links to pages featuring Art's work, including Sunco Volume 1, Philip Jose Farmer's A Feast Unknown, and the Worlds of Philip Jose Farmer anthologies. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.